Hey everyone, welcome back to Black Tea. The tea is hot. Matter of fact, let me put this tea down because I got some information and some facts for you guys. Some shocking facts. Yes, people, did you know that less than 5% of African Americans are enrolled in the University of California system? And less than 1% of black women have a doctorate's degree. Now, I know in the South, like the HBCs and some of the East Coast schools, there are a lot of African Americans, but in California, we are slim pickings. And I was watching a show called Queer Eye, which is on Netflix, and it's about a group of gay guys who go and change people's lives, give them makeovers, teach them how to cook, from a gay point of view. Although that black folks make 14% of the U.S. population, less than half of our population has been to a college or university. I know back in our grandparents' days, that was everything. I remember my grandfather telling me a story about how he didn't have the opportunity to go to college, much less even high school, that he had to work at the farm and couldn't even get a high school education, that it was more important that he work in the farm and raise money for his family. What's even more amazing about my grandfather, that he didn't learn how to read and write and was able to raise 6 children in California. He was a janitor for 20 years at one of the colleges, actually, city colleges, and did a pretty good job, I think. But the fact that he couldn't read or write, how does that happen even in this system? But you think about that time, it was important to raise money, that even if he could go to school in the South, there was such prejudice and racism that the Jim Crow laws were just around the corner, and he just didn't have the time to go to school and learn. He had to go out there and make that money. Talk about making that money. But it's interesting too, because Sidney Poitier had passed away, y'all know, just a few days ago, and he talked about when he came over to America from the Bahamas that he couldn't read either. And the job that he had when he first came to America, there was a guy that he confided that he couldn't read, and he was going out for these auditions, but he couldn't read the auditions. So this guy every day would teach Sidney Poitier how to read. And of course, the rest is history. But I'm just trying to imagine in a world where you couldn't read something in front of you. Like you go to a restaurant, how do you read the menu? How do you get a job? My grandfather was able to get a job working for the state as a janitor for 20 years and was able to raise 6 children. One was my mother. And when you hear a story like that, you can't help but to take education serious in your family. Another thing I think about a lot is I am the first generation of African American descent that was able to have our full civil rights. When you think about Martin Luther King in 1969, 68, the civil rights movements, they were fighting for the rights that I have now. They didn't have those rights. And then when they finally had those rights, I'm the first generation that was able to benefit from that. I was born in 1969, people. Yes, I am old. And I also had the privilege of growing up in California, so I didn't really have the prejudice in the South. But I always asked my grandmother when she moved to California, was it more racist in the South or was it more racist in California, since she had lived both? And she would always say that it was more racist in California than it was in the South. And I'm like, why, Grandma? Why is that? And she said, in the South, you knew who the enemy was. You knew where the Confederate flag was. You stay on your side, I'll stay on my side, and we meet on Main Street. But in California, you don't know who your neighbors are. Your neighbors could be racist and you would never know. Your colleague or your coworker. You can't trust anybody in California because you just don't know your neighbors, all these apartments and high rises and condos. A lot of us don't even know who's in our building coming in or out. So she always felt fearful of racism in California than she did in the South. Rest her peace, she's no longer with us, neither is my grandfather, but I learned a lot from just sitting there, listening to my grandparents. I really miss that, and just telling those Southern stories and telling us how important it is for education, and get your education, go to school, make sure you don't miss a day of school because that's going to get you out of the hood or get you out of wherever you are or your situation. That education was everything. For me, I went a little bit different route. I, straight from high school, got a job at an airline, and I saw the world for 30 years. That was my biggest education. That was my university. So I believe there's many ways of getting your education. It doesn't have to be actually in a university or a college. I think that is more for being less ignorant in the world. The more you know, the more you do better. So I just think that when affirmative action had ended in the late 90s, I think Bill Clinton abolished affirmative action. Affirmative action was where they had women, mostly women, and African Americans and people of color. I don't want to say the wrong word, but special privileges. I guess I would call it. They would reserve spots for people of color and women to get into universities. A lot of companies had to hire minorities because they didn't have any minorities in their company. It was unconstitutional because it was based on race and gender, which is unconstitutional. But it was a way to catch up black people. It was a way to get us in the room so we can compete on the same leveling page. You think about it, if you reserve 10 spots in a university for black people, there's still 90% chance of a white person getting in the university. I don't know. What do you guys think about affirmative action? Do you think that it was a racist thing? Do you think that we need it now? Do you think that would help African Americans get to the levels that they need to be to get in the room, to be able to be educated more than what we are being able to do? All right, folks, that's all I have today. This is going to be a short podcast because it's the Martin Luther King weekend and I gotta go. I got things to do, folks. But I wanted to get a podcast out to you guys, so it won't be too long before my next podcast. If you like what you see or what you hear, make sure you subscribe to my podcast as The Black Tea is Hot, y'all, on any of the podcasts platforms. And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe down below. Make sure you like the video. That's what gets the algorithm up and we can get my message out. You can find me on my Instagram at SkyBobbyTV. You can find me on YouTube at SkyBobbyTV. And that's all I got, folks. Holla. I'll see you on the next podcast. Bye, girl. Bye.